This video is about how to add glaze to your project. Here are the steps that we will go over in this video. When you're glazing, you need to consider whether or not it needs to be food safe. The symbol here with the fork and the knife will tell you whether or not your glaze is food safe. You should, however, know that all glaze is toxic in its liquid form before it's fired. If you have any broken pieces, you have a few options. The first option is if your piece is flat like a tile and the broken piece can just set on top, you are welcome to glaze the entire thing and make sure to put a good line of glaze on the broken part. This should fuse them together. The next option is to glaze them separately, and you'll need to leave an area on both the base and the piece you are gluing without any glaze. This will ensure that your pieces actually stick together because glue does not like to hold onto a glazed surface. If your broken piece does not sit flat in the glaze firing, you will need to glaze them separately and glue them on later. The glue will disintegrate in the kiln, so the glue has to be put on after the glaze firing. So you will just glaze both pieces separately and leave bisque wear on the space where you need to add glue. When you're ready to start glazing, the first step is going to be to run your hands over the surface of your pot. You're just looking for super sharp areas or dingleberries that need to come off, and you're going to just lightly hit those pieces with a little bit of sandpaper. You should do this over the trash can, and anything that requires more than a few seconds of sanding probably won't come off. So you're just trying to get any loose pieces off of your piece. Once you finish sanding, you're going to use warm water to rinse off your piece. This gets any dust off of your piece, and it also opens up the pores of your piece to receive glaze. Glaze does not do well with any dust or impurities, so you need to get all of those off of your piece, any loose pieces and dust, in order to start glazing. Otherwise, your glaze will flake off. After that, you need to choose your glaze and write it on your glaze sheet. This is an example of the glaze sheet where I've written my project on the left, and then I've kept track of all of my glazes, and I'm going to mark down each coat as I paint it on. After that, you're going to clean your brush to make sure that you get all of the gunk and dust off of it. Now it's time to prep your glaze. This is what good consistency of glaze should look like. It should be somewhere between a pudding or a thin yogurt. To prep your glaze, you need to make sure the lid is on super tight, and then you're going to shake it over the sink. Glaze will separate, so all glaze needs to be shaken up before you use it. And this is what happens if you go to shake it without putting the lid on all the way. One thing to pay attention to is that the glaze is not always the color inside as it is on the picture, so you need to pay the most attention to the picture. So you can see in that blue root tile that the picture is blue but the glaze is red. That is because glaze is elements instead of pigments. You can see in these two small containers that even though they're similar colors, that indigo float is going to be a blue and the oatmeal is going to be a yellow. So even though they're similar colors in the jar, they are going to be very different when they come out. So pay attention to the label on the bottle rather than the color inside the bottle. Once you're all prepped, you're going to take your clean brush and you're going to paint on 3 even coats of glaze. For this part, I'm using clear and I'm not leaving any goops or glops. I need 3 really smooth, even coats of glaze. When you're painting more than one glaze on, you should have them slightly overlap or at least touch each other. You can have drips if that's something that you're interested in, but in this case you need to paint your first color on all the way 3 coats and make sure they're completely dry before starting that second coat. So you can see in this one that I've got a light blue, which is like a white glaze when it dries, and then I've got a darker blue on the inside, and then they slightly overlap where they touch so I won't have any empty spots. To start my larger part of the project, I'm going to flip my piece upside down. Now, while I'm painting on my first layer, I am leaving a very thin line about a 1/4 inch or the size of a pencil at the bottom. This is going to ensure that if my glaze ever runs, that it doesn't stick to the kiln shelf. I flipped my piece upside down so I could get a really even line all the way along the bottom. I'm never going to paint the bottom. I'm always going to leave a small line in case the glaze runs. So you can see in these examples, there's always at least going to be a lip at the bottom where there's no glaze. And then sadly, this is what happens if you do glaze all the way to the bottom. It gets stuck to the kiln shelf and typically ends up breaking the piece. You'll know you're ready for your next layer of glaze when the glaze that you've just painted on is super chalky. Otherwise, if you keep painting on and it's not all the way dry, your paintbrush will pick up the areas below and you won't have 3 even layers of glaze. When you're glazing anything with an inside, you want to make sure that you glaze all the way around your piece and inside all of the little holes. So in this luminary example, I'm painting inside the piece, and I'm also going to be addressing the inside of all of the cutouts to make sure that my glaze is consistent. This is what a completely finished and glazed piece looks like. Notice that it's all chalky on the inside and outside. This means that it's all ready to go onto the cart to go into the glaze fire. Since we fire things that have lids with the lids on top, when you go to glaze, you need to leave every area where your lid touches. If you have a lid on something, you need to leave every area where that lid touches completely void of overglaze. Otherwise, they'll stick together and you won't be able to take them apart at the end. When you finish glazing, you need to put your pieces either back in your locker if you're not done or on the cart if you are done. Then you need to clean your brushes really well, put them away, and dump all of your clear glaze containers back into their original bottles. Clean out the glaze containers and put them away. Then your bottles need to be closed up and put back into the correct cabinet, and then wipe down your spot, and then you're all finished.